Imagine a tiny vial of your blood.
Okay.
Right now, a nurse somewhere is pressing a cotton ball to a patient's arm. They tape it up, and they walk away with this small plastic tube.
Right, happens thousands of times a day.
Exactly. And for most of us, that tube just, it disappears into a void.
It completely vanishes from our minds.
Yeah. A few days later, you get an app notification. It pops up with a bunch of confusing numbers. But the reality is, by the end of the day, that single drop of blood will travel through this invisible multi-billion-dollar industrial engine.
An engine that is so vast and complex that it basically dictates how modern medicine functions.
Yes. Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to take you inside that exact machinery. We're looking at Quest Diagnostics.
And specifically, we are decoding a pretty dense stack of their Q1 2026 financial presentations and earnings releases.
Yeah, I know what you might be thinking.
Why are we reading corporate financial reports, right?
Right. But stick with us here.
Yeah.
We aren't here to do accounting. We're here to understand what these massive numbers tell us about, the rapidly shifting landscape of everyday healthcare.
Yeah, and the sudden arrival of artificial intelligence in your personal medical records.
Oh, which is a huge part of this.
Yeah.
And just generally how the very nature of biological data is being packaged and delivered to you.
So to really grasp the implications of this first quarter report, I think we have to start with the sheer scale of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, set the stage for us.
Quest Diagnostics isn't just a successful company. It's really a load-bearing pillar of the United States health system.
Like, how big are we talking?
They currently serve 50% of U.S. hospitals and physicians.
Half of them.
Half. Think about that physical footprint.
Oh.
Every single year, their labs touch 1 in 3 adult Americans.
That is just wild.
And financially, in 2025 alone, they brought in $11.04 billion in revenue.
Billion with a B.
Exactly. So when an entity of that size, with that level of deep integration into the healthcare grid, reports a structural shift in their data.
Which they just did.
Right. It's a massive bellwether for the health of the entire system.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the top-level results they just released for the first quarter of 2026 are definitely catching Wall Street's attention.
Oh, for sure.
Net revenues hit $2.90 billion. That's a 9.2% jump from the same time in 2025.
And it's worth noting, they pointed out it was almost entirely organic growth.
Right, not just them buying up competitors.
Right.
And if you look at profitability, their adjusted diluted earnings per share grew 13.1%. That brings it to $2.50.
It's a very solid start to the year.
It really is.
Right.
In fact, their CEO, Jim Davis, announced they're actually raising their full year 2026 guidance.
Yeah, they're now expecting to hit up to $11.90 billion in revenue.
It's an undeniably strong quarter. But headline revenue numbers only tell you that the engine is running fast.
Exactly. They don't tell you what fuel it's burning.
Right. So to understand how they're achieving this kind of growth, we have to look under the hood at the underlying volume metrics.
We need to see what specific tests they are running and who is actually fitting the bill.
Which brings up a really fascinating contradiction I found buried in the data.
Oh, the volume versus pricing thing?
Yes. So if you look at their requisition volume, which is basically just the total number of physical test orders flowing through their network, it's up a massive 10.9% compared to last year.
So people are getting a lot more lab work done.
A lot more. But the revenue per requisition actually dropped by 1.3%.
Right.
So they're doing more work, but they're making slightly less on every individual order.
What's fascinating here is that this drop in per-test revenue wasn't a mistake.
It wasn't.
No, and it certainly wasn't a sign of weakness in their pricing power. It was entirely expected.
Okay, how so?
It comes down to a fundamental change in what they call their mix. Quest has been aggressively securing massive strategic relationships.
Like taking over other labs.
Kind of. The data specifically points to recent partnerships with Fresenius Medical Care and Corewell Health.
Corewell is a leading health system up in Michigan.
Exactly. When Quest steps in to take over the lab work for these giant entities, they take on an immense, guaranteed volume of daily tests.
Okay, I see the math, and tell me if I'm wrong here, taking a pay cut on your core product just to chase volume seems incredibly risky.
It sounds counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if those strategic partnerships dry up? Or if the sheer volume overwhelms their lab capacity?
That's a fair point, but it's all about economies of scale.
Okay.
Think of a local hospital running its own lab. They have to buy the expensive chemical reagents, maintain multi-million-dollar testing machines.
Staff highly specialized technicians.
Right, all for a relatively small pool of local patients. It's a capital nightmare for the hospital.
So Quest steps in.
Quest steps in and says, hey, we already have mega labs running 200/7. We will take over your entire lab operation. We'll even handle the specialized water purity testing for your dialysis clinics.
Wow.
And in exchange for giving Quest tens of thousands of tests a day, the hospital gets a bulk discount.
So it isn't like a coffee shop selling lattes at a discount.
No, not at all.
It's more like a massive microchip factory.
Right.
Where running the machines at 100% capacity all day, even at a lower margin, is way more profitable than letting them sit idle.
Precisely. The fixed costs of running a mega lab are already paid for. Every additional test they pump through the system is highly profitable, even at a lower contracted price.
That makes a lot of sense.
In fact, the Q1 report explicitly notes that if you exclude the impact of this specific Fresenius and Corewell mix, their revenue per requisition actually grew by about 2.5%.
Oh, wow. So the core business is successfully raising prices, while the strategic joint ventures are just flooding the system with highly efficient volume.
Exactly.
That clarifies the pricing paradox. But it also highlights a major shift in who actually holds the purse strings here.
The pairs are changing.
Yeah, looking at the revenue charts, back in the first quarter of 2024, traditional fee-for-service health insurers made up 37% of their revenue.
Right.
But looking at Q1 2026, that slice of the pie has shrunk to 33%.
It's a subtle percentage shift, but it's an incredibly important structural one.
Yeah.
The traditional fee-for-service insurance model is slowly giving way. Meanwhile, direct patient revenues and client payers remain really solid pillars.
So for you listening to this, what does this actually mean the next time you need blood work?
It means back-end consolidation.
Right. Healthcare is centralizing through these giant joint ventures and specialized clinic partnerships.
Huh?
You might walk into your familiar local clinic, and the sign on the door hasn't changed at all.
But the massive industrial machinery processing your biology is increasingly outsourced to centralized hubs.
Exactly. So we have millions of new tests flowing through the system.
But an AI can't translate data that isn't accessible to the patient.
Wait, jump back a second. The data delivery mechanism for lab work has historically been terrible.
Oh, it's the worst. The lab can process your blood faster than ever. But how does a regular person make sense of their results without spending 8 years in medical school?
Oh, it's completely anxiety-inducing. We've all been there, right? You get an email notification that your results are ready, your heart rate spikes,
You log into the portal?
and you're just staring at a wall of terrifying acronyms.
Yes.
It says something like, your BUN is elevated, your creatinine is out of range.
And most people don't know that BUN stands for blood urea nitrogen.
Exactly. Or that it and creatinine are just standard markers for how well your kidneys are filtering waste. You're just sitting on your couch, Googling each turn, trying to figure out if your kidneys are failing or if you just, I don't know, didn't drink enough water before the test.
The jargon barrier is massive. It leaves the patient entirely in the dark.
It really does.
But this Q1 report highlights a massive technological leap designed to dismantle that exact barrier.
The AI tool.
Yeah, Quest has recently launched an AI companion tool directly within their MyQuest patient app.
According to the release, its entire job is to translate that complex testing data into clear, plain language.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. I want to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
Isn't this crossing a dangerous line? Like, is this AI trying to replace a doctor's diagnosis?
That's the immediate fear, yeah.
Right. If an algorithm looks at a slightly elevated white blood cell count and tells a patient they might have an infection, how are they avoiding the massive legal liability of a bot essentially practicing medicine? Or just giving a patient a panic attack?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, their design philosophy here is very deliberate and legally cautious.
Okay.
The AI is absolutely not diagnosing. It is translating and defining.
So it's a dictionary, basically.
Exactly. There is a rigid wall between saying, you have diabetes, and saying, this test measures glucose, which is blood sugar, and your number is currently above the standard reference range.
Okay, I see the distinction.
The goal is to translate the vocabulary so that when you finally sit down with your physician, you aren't spending your entire 15-minute appointment having them explain what a lipid panel is.
So it's about elevating the starting point of the medical conversation.
Exactly.
It takes you from a terrified recipient of raw data to an informed participant.
By defining the data up front, Patients and physicians can focus their limited time together on actual decision-making and treatment plans rather than basic biology tutoring.
Which is huge because doctor visits are so short anyway.
Right, and the data shows people are desperate for this. The adoption rate they reported is staggering.
Yeah, what were the numbers?
Patients have already engaged with the Quest AI companion approximately 350,000 times.
Wow.
And keep in mind, that's just since its rollout earlier in the first quarter.
It really proves how much friction exists in standard medical communication. And this technology pairs perfectly with their growth in the consumer channel. They noted robust revenue growth through their questhealth.com platform and various collaborations with top consumer health companies.
They're building an ecosystem where you can order certain routine tests yourself, get the results pushed to your phone, and have an AI define them in plain English.
All completely outside the traditional waiting room experience.
But an AI can only translate the data it's given.
Right.
To give patients a truly deep level of insight, the actual chemical tests have to evolve from basic snapshots to predictive modeling.
And that brings us to the fastest growing sector of their lab work.
Advanced diagnostics.
This is where the science starts sounding like science fiction. Let's break down their portfolio to give this some context.
Sure.
If you look at their full year 2025 revenue pie chart, 54% of what they do is routine clinical testing. That's your standard physical blood work, cholesterol, things like that.
The basics.
Right. Another 6% is anatomic pathology.
For those unfamiliar, anatomic pathology is essentially the physical examination of tissues and organs.
Like biopsies.
Exactly. If you have a biopsy for a suspicious mole or a tumor, the anatomic pathology lab slices that tissue incredibly thin, stains it, and puts it under a microscope to look for irregular cell structures.
Okay, so that's 60% combined. But a massive 38% of their revenue now comes from gene-based and esoteric testing services.
38% is a huge footprint for tests that, frankly, were mostly confined to high-end research universities just a decade or two ago.
To frame this for you listening, think about it like maintaining a car.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Routine testing is like pulling into the garage and checking your car's oil level and tire pressure. It tells you the immediate basic status of the engine today.
Right.
But gene-based and advanced diagnostics, that's like having a sophisticated computer model predict that your transmission is going to fail in 6 months based on microscopic vibrations in the engine block, long before you ever hear a clunk.
That's a great way to conceptualize the shift. We are moving from reactive measurements to predictive, high-precision monitoring.
And the Q1 data points to a specific and frankly wonderful success story in this area.
The Alzheimer's test.
Yes. They reported double-digit revenue growth for the Quest AD Detect blood tests for Alzheimer's disease.
Which is incredible.
For decades, confirming Alzheimer's meant either a highly invasive, painful spinal tap or an incredibly expensive PET scan that most insurances fought covering.
Right.
The fact that looking for the specific amyloid beta proteins associated with Alzheimer's is becoming a high-growth, commercially accessible blood test is a complete paradigm shift.
It completely changes the accessibility of neurology, but the innovations in oncology mentioned in this report are equally profound.
Yeah, they highlighted 2 major announcements regarding MRD.
Right. MRD stands for measurable residual disease.
Break the mechanics of that down for us. What does finding residual disease actually look like in a lab?
So when a patient is treated for cancer, say with chemotherapy, the main tumor might shrink and completely disappear on a traditional MRI or CT scan.
Which is great news.
Fantastic news. But microscopic fragments of the cancer's DNA, or a handful of rogue cells, can still be floating in the bloodstream.
Ah, okay.
MRD tests are highly sensitive methods to track those whispers of cancer. Quest just launched the Quest Flow cytometry MRD for myeloma.
Flow cytometry.
Yeah, it literally means measuring cells as they flow. They take the blood sample and pass the cells single file through a specialized laser beam.
Wait, single file, they line up blood cells one by one?
Yes, through a fluidic system.
That is wild.
Right. As each individual cell passes through the laser, the light scatters. Based on how that light scatters and how specific fluorescent dyes react, the computer can identify the exact type and health of that single cell.
Wow.
It's how they can spot one single cancer cell hiding among a million healthy ones.
That is just incredible technology.
It is. And on top of that, they announced a major research collaboration with City of Hope to study the use of haystack MRD for 4 different solid tumor cancers across 14 U.S. sites.
So they aren't just looking to see if cancer is present. They're tracking its absolute microscopic footprint to see if a specific chemotherapy drug is actually working in real time.
This raises an important question about how we treat disease. Why this matters to you is that it fundamentally changes the timeline of cancer care.
Right.
We are moving from a world where we only test to find out if you are sick
Hmm.
to a world where high-sensitivity blood tests actively monitor the exact genetic footprint of a disease during your treatment.
So you aren't waiting in the dark.
Exactly. You don't have to wait 6 months for another full-body scan to see if the tumor grew back. Your oncologist can see if the cancer DNA in your blood is trending up or down week by week and adjust your medication instantly.
It's an incredible leap forward.
Mm-hmm.
But when I read about millions of next-generation genetic tests and Alzheimer's blood markers and hundreds of thousands of AI inquiries pinging their servers,
Yeah,
all I can think about is the IT infrastructure.
the back end.
Processing all of this requires a flawless back end. You can't run the hyper-personalized medicine of the future on the clunky billing infrastructure of the 1990s.
Which is exactly why they are heavily investing in operational upgrades. The medicine doesn't work if the infrastructure collapses under the data weight.
Right. None of this growth, the jump to nearly $2.9 billion this quarter, or the $11.9 billion they expect to hit this year, none of it is possible without addressing the friction in the system.
Right.
And in this Q1 report, they bring up something called Project Nova. It's described as a massive, multi-year initiative aimed at transforming their order-to-cash processes and systems.
Order to cash is dry industry speak.
Very dry.
But what it actually means for the listener is the entire life cycle of a medical test. It starts the exact moment your doctor clicks order test in their electronic medical record. That system has to talk to Quest's system. The lab processes the physical vial. Then the coding department has to assign complex medical billing codes, submit it to your specific health insurance, wait for their automated system to adjudicate the claim, and finally, bill you for whatever your deductible didn't cover.
And anyone who has ever received a surprise $500 lab bill in the mail knows exactly how broken that system is.
Oh, it's terrible.
Usually it's just because the doctor used an outdated diagnostic code and the insurance company's computer automatically denied the claim because it didn't strictly match their medical necessity guidelines.
Right.
It's a massive point of friction.
It requires millions of hours of manual human intervention to untangle those denied claims.
Yeah.
Upgrading a system that handles that much administrative friction while touching 1 in 3 Americans every year is like trying to rewrite the rules of a massive multi-lane highway interchange without stopping the millions of cars currently driving through it.
Every test result and billing code is a card that cannot be delayed.
Exactly.
And you can see how delicate that operation is based on the timeline they published. They advanced their planning and design work for Project Nova in Q1. But the first wave of these new integrations and solutions isn't even launching until the fall of 2027.
It really shows how far ahead these massive healthcare entities have to plan just to keep the current system from buckling under the sheer volume of data.
Let alone preparing for the advanced genetic testing of the future.
They have to build the superhighway today for the data-heavy medical cars arriving tomorrow.
So what does this all mean? We've spent this time looking at the guts of a Q1 financial report, but the narrative that emerges isn't really about finance at all.
No, not really.
It's a cohesive picture of transformation. We have a company scaling up its physical footprint through massive joint ventures like Corewell to handle more volume.
Right.
They're launching cutting-edge gene and Alzheimer's tests that act like predictive radars. And they're rolling out AI tools to explain those complex tests directly to the consumer.
If we synthesize this deep dive, the financial success of this quarter, the 15.5% jump in operating income up to $399 million, is a reflection of a fundamental shift in healthcare philosophy.
Yeah.
We are witnessing the pivot where diagnostics are becoming vastly more sensitive, highly proactive, and far more integrated into the daily digital lives of patients.
It's no longer just about the chemical test result.
Exactly. It's about the accessibility, the speed, and the actionability of that biological data.
And that leaves us with a totally different kind of question to mull over.
Okay.
We're watching this massive data infrastructure being built right in front of us as these mega labs hoover up millions of advanced genetic profiles, run incredibly sensitive tumor DNA screenings, and feed all of that into centralized AI systems to translate it for us.
Yeah.
Who actually owns the map of your biology?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right. We are gaining incredible insights into our own health. But are we trading our most intimate genetic blueprints for the convenience of a plain English app notification? Will we eventually reach a point where patients become the primary directors of their own healthcare journeys, completely bypassing the traditional doctor's visit to understand their own biology?
It's a trade-off we're all going to have to navigate very soon.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and remember to always keep questioning the data around you.